Hey guys, this is Jenny Gibble.
And just as the sea finally cast ashore the debris that ships throw overboard, and beachcombers furtively retrieve it before daybreak, so the memory of the night during the war in 1945 plagued him one last time in his life. On a Saturday in the second half of November in 1981, he woke up with such an unbearable toothache that something had to be done at once. At 9 o'clock, he called the dentist who had been treating him for over 20 years, but the office didn't answer. After some hesitation, he called the home number. The dentist told him to take an aspirin because he wasn't about to do any work that day. He was going to the demonstration. A demonstration? Against what? Against nuclear arms. But I can't stand the pain. How did that happen, all of a sudden? I've been feeling it coming on for a few days. Why didn't you call sooner? I was at a conference in Munich. Don't your fellow anesthesiologists know how to relieve pain? And by the way, shouldn't you be at that demonstration? Come on, you know I don't go in for that sort of thing. Oh, really? But you do have toothaches, don't you? Look here, friend. I'm demonstrating today for the first time in my life. I'm willing to help you out, but only on condition that you join us. Anything, as long as you help me. It was settled that Anton should be at the office at 11:30. Even though the assistant wouldn't be around because she would also be demonstrating, the dentist would see what he could do. And so nothing came of the weekend in Gelderland, which he had been looking forward to after Germany. He told Lisbeth to go alone with Peter, but she wouldn't even consider it. As if she were a nurse, she handed him, on a tiny platter, a tiny, dry, brown twig about a centimeter long. Its diminutive chalik, with a rounded end lying in the middle of the white coffee filter. What's that? A clove. Put it inside your tooth. That's what they used to do in the Indies. It seemed to her a bit excessive, the way he embraced her almost in tears. Come on, Ton, don't overdo it. Unfortunately, I don't have a hole in my tooth. I don't know what the matter is with it. But I'll eat this. It was no help at all, however. Chewing was out of the question. Watched over by Peter, he paced through the house, his mouth wide with pain, like those yawning faces on the signs that hang outside apothecaries in Amsterdam. He was thinking about the peace demonstration he would have to join. He had read about it and knew it would be the largest in Europe, but it wouldn't have occurred to him either to take part of it or not to take part. He had simply noted it as if it were a weather report. It was merely a symptom. The year 2000 was approaching and the fear of the millennium was in the air, just as it had been 1,000 years ago. Atom bombs were produced as deterrents, not to be used, but as a safeguard the peace. If such a paradoxical weapons were abandoned, then the chances of conventional warfare would increase and eventually lead to the use of atom bombs anyways. Yet at the same time, he had felt ill at ease when the old man in America had announced that limited nuclear warfare was not out of the question, and that it would take place in Europe, where it would be total. He had been somewhat reassured when the old man in Russia had disagreed, replying that it would indeed be out of the question because he would make sure that America was totally destroyed. But in either case, the implication was that atomic armaments should not be abandoned. He drank the chamomile tea which Lisbeth brewed for him, and sitting on the sofa, tried to pass the time by doing one of those pun and anagram crossword puzzles. Can't the sun god give you a more precise definition for this heap of ruins? 6 letters. It was as if being unable to bite made him incapable of thinking. He stared at the sentence. Though it looked as if it ought to be easy, he found no solution. Since the dentist office was not too far from his house, at 10:30 he decided to go on foot. The weather was cool and overcast. With pain drilling in his jaw, he walked through the increasingly crowded streets. A helicopter circled in the distance. Further ahead, all car and trolley traffic had stopped. Apparently, the center of the city had been closed off. Even the main arteries were full of people walking in the same direction, many of them with placards held high. They were foreigners, too. He saw a group of warrior types wearing turbans, wide pants, and sword belts, with only the pistols and Schmidt-Mars missing. Displaced Kurds, perhaps, who marched, laughing and singing, with the supple tread of nomads, behind a banner covered in Arabic characters. Whether this proclaimed the jihad, the holy war, no one would ever know. Soon the streets were more crowded than they had been since May 1945. People were streaming from all directions toward the Museumplein. The prospect of having to join the mob later made his tooth ache all the more. God knows what could have happened if panic broke out, if agitators should get involved. Anything was possible nowadays in Amsterdam. Luckily, except for the helicopter in the sky, no police were in sight. At the dentist office he rang, but no one answered. Shivering with cold or whatever, he stood in the waiting doorway. The sun god was Ra, of course. That was too obvious. Racket, Raphael, Rattles, those would be to evoke the god. Rappins, those would be the writing tool of the sun god, with which he would record his definitions. In the distance, an endless stream of people was crossing the side street on which he stood. When the dentist finally arrived, limping on his clubfoot, his wife on his arm, he burst out laughing. "You look very fit." "Go ahead and laugh, Jarrett Jan," said Anton. You're you're a fine healer, you are, blackmailing your patients. It's all in the service of humanity, all in the spirits of hypocrites. He had dressed for the occasion in a feudal hunting costume, a green loden jacket, and underneath, green knee breeches and long dark green socks. This made his huge shoe more visible than ever. As they entered the operating room, the telephone rang. "I don't believe it," said Van Lennep. "Not another one." It was Lisbeth. Peter had said he wanted to go on the demonstration. In that case, he'd better ride over on his bicycle and wait for him outside, Anton said. Van Lemmet had thrown his coat over the assistant's desk. "Let's have a look, friend. Which one is it?" While his wife went once more to the bathroom, because it would later be impossible, he aimed the lamp at Anton's mouth and touched the tooth with his finger. Pain ricocheted through Anton's head. Van Lemmet took a slip of gray paper, laid it on the tooth, and told him to close his jaw carefully and gently move them back and forth. He examined the paper once more, then took the drill off the hook. "Professionally speaking," said Anton, "I would appreciate an injection." "Are you out of your mind? It's nothing. Open your mouth." Anton crossed his fingers and kept his eyes on the other's gray hair brushed to one side. 2 or 3 seconds of pain and noise followed, after which Van Lemmet said, "Okay, close your mouth." The miracle had happened. The pain receded behind the horizon and disappeared as if it had never existed. How is it possible? Van Lemmet shrugged and hugged the drill back. "A slight pressure. Come to the surface. Often happens with age. Just rinse, please, and then we'll go." "Finished already?" asked his wife in surprise when they entered the room. "No, I suppose he thinks he can forget his promise," said Van Lemmet with a sly smile. "But that's where he's wrong. Do you realize, Garrett Jan," said Anton as they stood outside waiting for Peter, "that this is the second time you've expected a political commitment from me. The difference is that this time you're making it too." "When was the first time, then?" "It was a party in Haarlem, when you thought I ought to volunteer to fight in Korea, in the battle of Occidental Christianity against the communist barbarians." Van Lemmet stood staring at him in silence while his wife suppressed her laughter. A few streets further down, a voice was shouting through a loudspeaker. "Do you know what the trouble with you is, Steenwich? Your memory's much too good. As far as that goes, you're the one who's the blackmailer." "I certainly haven't become a communist, if that's what you're implying. How could I? You'll never make a dime out of a quarter, but those atomic weapons, they've become the greatest menace to humanity. They should be seen as some sort of assault from outer space." "It's not who controls them, it's the other way around. Each new wave of armament is presented as a reaction to the opposition, which in turn reacts to that. And so they keep putting up the responsibility to each other, and the things keep piling up, and one day they'll use them for sure. It's statistically unavoidable, as inevitable as Adam and Eve's taking a bite out of the apple from the tree of knowledge. We're going to have to get rid of those apples." Anton nodded. He was dumbfounded by this argument. But then, dentists were crazy, a well-known fact in medical circles. But perhaps there was something to it after all. Peter arrived and locked up his bicycle. Seeing him here, with the drone of the helicopter overhead and the roar of the crowd in the distance, a strange, gentle feeling suddenly came over Anton, connecting him somehow to what was happening in the city. They made hardly any progress along the last stretch of road to the rallying point between the concert of the Blit and the Ridge Museum. Under a huge black balloon shaped like a falling missile stood tens, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, with placards and banners up to 10 meters wide. More people were streaming in from the streets on all sides. Through loudspeakers hanging from the trees and lampposts rumbled a speech that was apparently being given on the rostrum in the distance. But Anton was indifferent to what was being said. What moved him was the presence of all the people here, and he and his son being part of them. Soon he lost sight of Van Lemmet, but it didn't occur to him to give up and go home. A minute later, this became impossible in any case. The two of them stood like two stalks in the middle of the human wheat field, with the scythe of the reaper over their heads. Anton's anxiety and panic had totally disappeared. Besides Peter, the people around him, against him rather,
were an elderly lady from the provinces wearing a transparent plastic rain hood over her hairdo. A burly fellow in a brown leather jacket with a fur collar who had a wide mustache and sideburns, and a young woman carrying a sleeping baby in a sling on her breast. That's who was there, and no one else. Among the slogans against nuclear arms, he was struck by a small placard that read, "Job, we are with you." He pointed to it and to Peter and explained who Job was. The loudspeakers announced that in the last half hour, 2,000 buses had entered Amsterdam. This meant another 100,000 people. Cheers, applause. The voice announced that thousands more were streaming in from the station, brought by special trains. All the streets leading to the Musée La Pien were impassable. Yet, though Anton, the fact, yet, thought Anton, the fact that the human voice could be amplified so much was itself related to the existence of atomic bombs. Neither the one nor the other would have been possible 40 years ago. Perhaps what was happening in the world was even more terrifying and insoluble than anyone imagined. He couldn't tell how long he stood there. Peter had spotted a classmate and disappeared some time ago. For an instant, Anton remembered the bunkers that he had once stood here, the Weckmerthine and the German administrative headquarters and the villas all around. Now, the square had the American consulate, the Russian trade legation, and the Societe Generale. Politicians were being hailed, others jeered at, and finally, step by step, the crowd began to move. Apparently, not everyone fit along the official route, for several different demonstrations began to enter the city from various directions. A curious euphoria pervaded Anton, a state not agitated or anxious, but dreamlike, connecting him with something far, far back that had existed before the war. He was no longer alone, but a part of all these people. In spite of the commotion, a great stillness hung over them. The present seemed to have changed everything, not only inside him, but also in this backdrop. Houses whose windows were hung here and there with white sheets, as in a city that surrenders. Gray clouds flying overhead, the black missile balloon blown back and forth, sometimes being snapped by the wind, then straining itself once more. Thanks for the future. At the corner of the square, the crowd met another wide stream of demonstrators who were on their way to the central meeting place. They let each other pass, laughing politely and excusing themselves. He was amazed. People were obviously not as ill mannered as he had thought, or else they had become less so. Or did these marchers just happen to be the ones who were not? He must thank Van Lempert for having brought him here. He began to stand on tiptoe to look around. Suddenly, he saw Sandra and called out. They waved and maneuvered toward each other. "I can't believe my eyes," Sandra explained. "Good for you, Pa." She kissed his cheek and took his arm. "What came over you?" "I suspect I'm the only one here who was forced to demonstrate, but now I'm being completely won over." "Hi, Bastian." He shook hands with her boyfriend, a handsome young man wearing blue jeans, sneakers, a Palestine kayef around his neck, and a gold ring in his left ear. Though Anton did not particularly like him, he was about to become the father of his grandchild. Sandra had been living in a rented room, but a few weeks ago she had moved into the young man's place, a barricaded squatter's house. After Anton had explained why he came, Bastian said, "Don't think you're the only one who was forced to be here. The place is stiff with police. Look." A group of soldiers who had appeared were greeted with applause. Anton noticed that some people were unable to control their tears at the sight of the uniforms. A daisy chain of girls and boys surrounded them protectively, as if they were a bunch of flowers. Anton couldn't believe his eyes. "Are you sure those boys were ordered to be here?" His glance crossed that of an older woman who seemed to recognize him, a patient, no doubt. He nodded vaguely at her. "No, idiot, not those. That one, over there." Bastian pointed at the man in a windbreaker who was filming the soldiers. "Police? Are you sure?" We should tear the camera out of his hands. "Yes, that's a great idea," said Anton. "That's all they're waiting for, something to spoil everything." "By accident, of course," said Bastian, with a crook smile that irritated Anton intensely. Sure, sure, by accident. Please behave yourself at the compassion of a pregnant woman. I wouldn't mind becoming a grandfather if that's too much to ask." "Okay," said Sandra in a sing-song voice. "Here we go again. Bye, Pa, I'll give you a call. Bye, darling, run along, and be sure you get out of that house before the police break in. So long, Bastian." It was not really a quarrel, but one more marks of an irritability between them, which had become almost inescapable. Van Limpet had completely disappeared, and so had Peter. Slowly, Anton drifted in with the stream. On the small balconies, older men and women were using both hands to make the victory sign, remembered from the war. Marching bands were accompanying the parade, and more music was being played on the sidewalks. Yet no one asked for money. All of society had gone a little bit crazy, Exuberant punk characters, their hair dyed yellow and purple, wearing black leotards and shiny black oversized jackets from the flea market, were dancing in the trolley car stations, tenderly watched by people who had been terrified of them until now. Only in the air did things go on as usual. Planes with banners streaming behind announced that Jesus alone can bring you peace. Promise to develop your photographs within the hour at Calverstrat number so and so. On the roof of a parked van sat two enterprising 15-year-olds displaying their own attitude towards the Police March. Dropped the first bomb on Washington. At this sight, people cleared their throats politely, somewhat embarrassed. There were also banners with Moscow written on them in Russian. In the distance, at every side street, more columns of humanity were crossing each other, sometimes in two different places. Slowly but surely, something incredible was happening. There were several different currents, each with a stream where he himself was caught. For different faces kept appearing. Halfway to the Stacker House of God, he was suddenly pushed aside by a file of black masked figures with rattles, fluorescent skeletons painted on their bodies. Who forced their way through the crowd. Figures of terror, like medieval victims of the plague. He bumped into someone and excused himself. It was the same woman who had stared at him a while ago. She smiled shyly. "Tawny?" she asked with some hesitation. "Do you remember me?" Surprised, he looked at her, a small woman about 60. Her hair almost white and very light, rather bulging eyes, behind the thick glasses. "You'll have to excuse me, I don't quite place. Karen." Karen Courtwig, your neighbor from Harlem. Okay, this is kind of cool. First, in a flash, the tall blonde woman from Home at Last changed into the little old lady at his side. Next came desperation. Desperation. If you don't want to talk to me, just say so. She said. She put in quickly. "I'll go away." "No, or rather, yes," he stammered. "I just have to. You took me by surprise. I've been watching you for quite a while now, but if you hadn't bumped into me, I wouldn't have spoken." She looked up at him apologetically. Anton tried to control himself. He shuddered a little. That dreadful evening during the war had suddenly surfaced again. The way a dark, chilly shadow will sometimes glide over the beach on a sunny day. "No, it's okay," he said, "since we happened to meet here." "I suppose it was meant to be," she said, and pulled a cigarette out of another open pack in her pocket. She inhaled the flame he lit in the palm of his hand and watched him shyly. "And during the peace march, yet, it was meant to be." Somberly, he put the lighter back in his pocket, thinking. "But the fact that Plogue should have been lying in the front of your house was not meant to be, apparently." One more, the old bitterness welled up, the inexhaustible bitterness. Was he meant to be lying in front of our house then? He walked at her side, step by step. It sickened him. He could have escaped from her easily, but he realized that the woman by his side was almost more upset than he. "I recognized you at once," Karen said. "You're as tall as your father was, and you're gray-haired, but still, you haven't really changed at all." "So I've been told more than once. I'm not sure it's a good thing. I've always known that I'd meet you someday." "Do you live in Amsterdam?" "Yes. For the last few years, I've been in Edenhoven." He kept silent, and she continued. "What's your profession, Tommy?" "I'm an anesthesiologist." "Really?" she asked in glad surprise, as if she had always hoped he would be. "Really? And you? Still nursing?" It seemed to distress her to talk about herself. "Not in years. I've lived abroad for a long time and worked with problem children. I do here too for a few years, but now I'm retired. My health isn't good." Once more, with enthusiasm, she asked, "Was that your daughter, the girl you were talking to?" "Yes," Anton admitted reluctantly. He felt there was no connection between that part of his life and Karen, that, in fact, it existed in spite of her. "She looks like your mother, don't you think? How old is she? 19? "She's pregnant, isn't she? You can tell by her eyes, even more than by her figure." "Do you have any other children?" "Another son by my second wife." He looked about her. "He should be here too, somewhere." "What's his name?" "Peter," Anton said and looked at Karen. "He's 12." He noticed her startled expression. To put her at ease, he said, "Do you have any children?" Karen shook her head, staring at the back of a woman who was pushing an old man in a wheelchair. "I never got married." "Is your father still alive?" As he asked, Anton realized that the question could have had sarcastic overtones. Again, she shook her head. "He's been dead a long time now." They shuffled along in silence, side by side, through the stream. The crowd had stopped chanting slogans for a while. Music was still playing all around, but in the immediate area, no one said a word. He could tell that though Karen wanted to talk about it, she didn't dare bring it up. Peter, forever 17. He would have been 55 now. This fact, even more than his own age, made Anton realize how long ago it had all happened. And now, here was this young woman, grown old, walking by his side. Once she had excited him, but her beautiful legs. Once she had excited him, but her beautiful legs, streamlined like airplane wings, had become angular and weathered with age. Perhaps she had been the last person that Peter saw. With the anxious yet relieved taste of a writer who has reached the last chapter of his book, he said, "Listen, Karen, let's not beat around the bush. You want to tell me about it, and I want to know. What exactly happened that night? Did Peter run into your house?" She nodded. "I thought he had come to shoot us," she said softly, keeping her eyes on the back of the marcher in front of her because of what we had done. She looked up at him for an instant. He had a gun in his hand. Plogues? So I was told later. All of a sudden, there he was, inside the room. He looked terrible. He just had a little old lamp, but I couldn't tell but I could tell that he'd gone wild. She swallowed, hurriedly, then continued. He said we were monsters. He was going to kill us. He was desperate. He didn't know what to do. They were after him and he couldn't leave the house. I told him to put down the gun, that he would hide it somewhere, or else they would take him for the murder if they came in. Then what did he say? Karen shrugged. I don't think he even heard me. He just stood waving the gun, listening for noises outside. My father told me to shut up. Anton kept a steady pace, his hands crossed behind his back, pensive, his eyes fixed on the street. He frowned. Why? I don't know. I never asked him. And he would never talk about that night again. But of course, they had seen Peter run into our house. They would have searched it and found the gun. Then we would have been up against the wall as accomplices. That's how things were then. They never bothered to find out exactly what happened. So, you mean, said Anton slowly, that your father found it rather convenient to be held up by someone whom the Germans would suspect of a crime. And as Karen nodded impertinently, he was, in other words, making Peter seem guilty in their eyes. Karen didn't answer. Step by step, they were carried along in the sluggish river of marchers. A group of boys about 16 years old came out of a street side. All of them had shaved heads, black leather jackets, black pants, and black boots with metal heels. They forced their way through the crowd and disappeared, across the bridge on the other side. And then, asked Anton, after a while, the entire army appeared on the quay. I can't remember how long that took. I was scared to death. Peter kept that thing pointed at our heads, and suddenly there was a lot of noise and shooting outside. I had no idea what he meant to do, and I don't think he knew himself. He must have realized that he was lost. I've often wondered why he didn't shoot us. By then, he had nothing to lose. Peter, or perhaps he finally realized that it wasn't our fault. I mean, she said, looking up at him to see if it was all right to say what she meant, that we didn't deserve to get the body any more than you or anyone else. I had seen Peter planning to put it in front of our house, and I'm not so sure about that, Anton interrupted. He may well have meant to take it to the Bumers. You remember, Mr. and Mrs. Bumers, they were old. Perhaps he was afraid your father would beat him up. Karen sighed and smoothed her hair. She gave Anton a desperate look. He knew she saw that he wanted to hear what happened next, but that he would never ask. With a sudden toss of the head, she turned away, as if it might help come from another direction. Finding none, she continued, "Oh, Tawny, there must have been a crack in the blackout of our French windows. They must have seen him there with his gun. Suddenly, a bullet crashed through the window. I threw myself down on the floor, but I think he'd been hit already. A second later, they kicked in the door and took a few more shots with their rifles, aiming at the ground as if they were finishing off an animal. Can't the sun god give you a more precise definition for this heap of ruins?" So this was it. Anton threw back his head and took a deep breath, staring, unseeing at a banner that flapped behind an airplane. The peace demonstration now seemed further away than what had happened 36 years ago. And yet, he had not been present in that room where he used to play a board game with Karen, and where Peter had been shot through a crack in the window. And then, he asked, I can't remember exactly. He could tell from her voice that she was crying, but he didn't look at her. I wasn't watching anymore. We were dragged out of the house immediately, as if something worse was going to happen to us. I think we stood for a long time in the cold. I can only remember the glass shattering as they broke your windows. Many more Germans came and walked in and out of the house. Then they took us across the lot, where other cars were waiting. We had to go to the Oxburner knot, but in the distance I still heard the explosions as they blew up your house. She was choking. Anton remembered Courtweg crossing a hall at the Oxterminatory, the glass of warm milk, the sandwich with schmaltz. He felt in total disorder, like a room that had been ransacked by thieves. And yet a wave of pleasure came over him at this memory, but it vanished as though the Schultz as the thought of Schultz as he had last seen him turned over, nearing the running board of the truck. Anton squeezed his eyes together tightly, then opened them wider. Were you questioned? He asked. I was questioned separately. Did you tell them the truth? Yes. What did they say when they heard that Peter had nothing to do with it? They shrugged. They had suspected it, since the gun must have been Plogue's, but in the meantime they had caught someone else. A girl, if I remember correctly. Yes, said Anton. I've been told the same thing. He took 4 steps, then said, Someone your age? Now, he must have known everything and then bury it forever. Roll a stone over it and never think about it again. There's one thing I don't understand, he said. They'd seen Peter threatening you with a gun, hadn't they? Didn't they ask why? Of course. And what did you tell them? The truth. He wondered whether he should believe her. On the other hand, she probably hadn't known yet that his parents could no longer talk. He himself, in fact, could have told them, but no one had asked him. So you admitted that Plogue had been lying at your door at first? Yes. And that you dragged him to ours? She nodded. Perhaps she thought that he wanted to rub it in, but that wasn't true. For a while, neither of them said a word. They walked along in the demonstration, yet out of it, side by side. Weren't you afraid, asked Anton, that they'd set your house on fire too? I wish they had, said Karen, as if she expected the question. How do you think I felt after all that? If they had, I would have led a quite different life. At that moment I had only one desire, to be shot by them or by Peter. Anton could tell that she meant it. His impulse was to touch her, but he didn't. What did they say when you told them? Was the Ostergrenat present in person? How should I know? I was questioned by a crot in civilian clothes first. Did he have a scar on his face? A scar? I don't think so. Why? Go on. First, he just muttered. What's it all to me? Why should I care? Who did what? Without looking up, then he put down his pen, crossed his arms, looked at me for a while, and said with admiration, Congratulations. Anton was tempted to congratulate her for meriting such a compliment, but he controlled himself. Did you tell your father this? In a faraway voice, Karen continued. He never knew what I said or told me what he said. We didn't see each other again till the next morning, when we were allowed to go home. Before I could say a word, he spoke. Karen, we'll never talk about this again. And you agreed? He never mentioned it for the rest of his life, even after we got home and saw the smoldering heap of ashes and heard from Miss Beamer, that your father and your mother, too. The woman pushing the old man in the wheelchair had disappeared, caught in a current streaming off in another direction, led by a woman with a megaphone. The crowd was shouting more slogans, accompanied by applause. But the unamplified voices got lost. Most people walked silently ahead, as if a dearly beloved were being carried away in a coffin further on. Bystanders on the sidewalk watched the passing parade. There was a difference between the marchers and those looking on, a kind of chill that had to do with warfare. I went to see Miss Beamer once, a few years after the war, he said. She told me you had moved right after the liberation. We emigrated to New Zealand. Really? Yes, said Karen, looking him straight in the eyes, because he was afraid of you. Of me? Anton laughed. He said he wanted to start a new life, but I think it's because he didn't want to have to face you. He began to set everything in motion the first day after the liberation. I'm sure he was afraid you might take revenge, on me too, when you grew up. Of all things, said Anton, it never even occurred to me. But it did to him. Your uncle rang our doorbell a few days after the liberation, but my father slammed the door in his face when he saw who it was. From that moment on, he was driven. A few weeks later, we moved in with an aunt of mine in Rotterdam. Since he had all kinds of connections there before the war, we managed to leave on a merchant ship within the year. We may have been the first Dutch immigrants in New Zealand. With a strange, cold expression, she added, and there, in 48, he committed suicide. Though at first Anton was aghast, his horror was soon replaced by a feeling of acceptance and peace, as if he had finally been vindicated. 33 years ago, Peter's death had already been avenged. What would Takes have said to that? 3 years after he aimed at Plogue, there had been still another victim. Why? Anton asked. What did you say? Why did he commit suicide? After all, he moved the body in self-defense. Perhaps he did it mainly for you. He just helped fate along a little bit. There must have been an obstruction of head somewhere, for they had come to a standstill. Karen shook his head. You don't think so? Asked Anton. No, it never occurred to any of us that they would shoot all the inhabitants. They never had before. We felt our lives were in danger only because Peter pointed the gun at us. Then I still don't understand it. He just wanted our house to go up in flames instead of his own. All right, it's not very pretty, but he couldn't know that everything would turn out much worse. I can understand that his conscience might be bothering him, but suicide? He saw Karen swallow. Tawny, she said, there's something I have to tell you. She stood still, then had to keep walking because the procession was moving. When we heard those shots and we saw Plo lying in front of the house, what he said was, My God, the lizards. With wide-eyed disbelief, Anton looked out over her head. The lizards? Was it possible? Could everything be blamed on the lizards? Were they the culprits in the end? Do you mean, he said, that without the lizards, none of this would have happened? Deep in thought, Karen picked a hair off his shoulder with her thumb and finger and dropped it on the pavement. I've never understood what they meant to him. Something about eternity and immorality, some secret he saw in them. I don't know how to put it. Like little children, the way they always seem to have a secret. He could sit staring at them for hours, as motionless as they were. I believe it had something to do with Mother's death. But don't ask me what. You should have seen how much trouble he took to keep them alive through that winter of hunger. It was almost the only thing he still cared about. Possibly he was more attached to those animals than to me. They had become his only reason for living. The parade had come to a stop again. The street was completely blocked because all the separate demonstrations were now trying to join the main one. Anton and Karen stood behind a wide banner, which was not held taut so that it obstructed the view. And she continued, Peter, dead, and your parents too. They seemed to turn back into lizards for him again, just ordinary animals. As soon as we came home from Oxford, he trampled them all to death. I heard him stamping up there like a madman. After that, he locked the door, and I wasn't allowed into the room. It was weeks before he cleaned up the mess and buried what was left of them in the garden. Karen made a hesitant move. Maybe that's what he couldn't face, that 3 people had lost their lives because of his love for a bunch of reptiles, and the thought that you might kill him if you ever got the chance. How could I? Anton said. I didn't know about all this, but I knew. And he knew that I knew. And that's why he had to drag me along with him to the other side of the world. Very much against my will. But in the end, he didn't need you to kill him. He was possessed by you. Anton felt sick. That whole story was worse than the partial one that he had known. He looked at Karen's face, the tears still on it. He had to get away from her, never see her again. But there was one more thing he must find out. She was still talking, but hardly to him. He was a desperately unhappy man. Whenever he wasn't busy with his lizards, he stared at maps. The road to Moxernaut, American convoys. He was too old to try to escape to England, so that... Karen, said Anton. She fell silent and looked at him. We were sitting at home. You heard those shots. Then when you saw Plug lying there, you went outside to move him, right? Yes. My father forced me to. It took him only a second to decide. Listen, each of you was holding one end of him. Your father, the shoulders, you, the feet. Did you see that? Never mind. There was something more I have to know. Why did you put him in front of our door and not in the our tarts or the other side? That's what I wanted. That's what I wanted, cried Karen, in sudden agitation, clutching at Anton's arm. It seems so obvious to me that he shouldn't land at your door, yours and Peter's, but at the Arthur says, where there were only 2 people whom we didn't really know. I had already taken a step toward their house, but the father said, no, not there. They're hiding Jews. Christ, exclaimed Anton, slapping his forehead. Yes, I had no idea, but father did, apparently. A young family with a small child had been hiding there since 43. I saw them for the first time on Liberation Day. These people certainly would have been killed if Plogue had been found over there. They must have been watching us too, but they never knew what was really going on. The Artises, whom nobody could stand because they kept to themselves, they had saved the lives of 3 Jews, and those Jews, with their presence, had saved their own. In spite of everything, Courtwick had been a good man. So this was why Plogue's body had landed on the other side at their own door, so that Anton couldn't take it anymore. Goodbye, Karen, he said. Please excuse me. Good luck to you. Without waiting for an answer, leaving her standing there, he turned away and forged through the crowd, going this way and that, as if to make sure that she could never find him again. It took a while before he came to his senses, but not too long. He joined a part of the parade that was still moving. or was once more on the move. He let himself be carried along by the crowd. It was as if these hundreds of thousands of people, these endless streams of human lives, were helping him, crossing the bridge and canals in front of him and behind him, swelling with still more groups emerging from the side streets. Suddenly, he felt a hand on his. It was Peter, smiling up at him. He smiled back, but his hands were stinging. He leaned over and, without a word, kissed the warm top of his head. The boy began to chatter, but Anton hardly heard him. Was everyone both guilty and not guilty? Was guilt innocent and innocence guilty? The three Jews, 6 million of them, had been killed, 12 times as many as there were people marching here. But by being in danger, those three people had unknowingly saved themselves and the lives of two others, and instead of them, his own father and mother and Peter had died, all because of some lizards. Peter, he said, but when the boy smiled up at him, he shook his head and laughed. Well, Peter laughed back. At the same time, he thought, ravage, of course, ravage. That would be the sun god Ra's vague definition, giving away the you. And as they came to Westerkirk, on their way to the dam, a dreadful howl of the mob sounded in the distance behind them and moved closer. Frightened, everyone turned around. What was happening? Nothing must happen now. It was unmistakably a howl of fear, which did not stop, but was coming closer and closer. As it reached them, nothing at all happened, but everyone suddenly began to scream without reason, even Peter, and even Anton. A minute later, the scream had passed them by and moved ahead, leaving them laughing in its wake. Around the bend of the Rosterhot, it died down. Peter tried to revive it, but without success. Then, some minutes later, the howl approached once more from behind, overtook them again, and disappeared ahead. Anton realized that it was moving through the entire city. The first marchers having already returned to the Muserplan, the last ones not having left it yet. It circled about, everyone shouting and laughing at once, and yet it was a howl of fear, the primal scream of mankind rising from all of them. But what does it matter? Everything is forgotten in the end. The shouting dies down, the waves subside, the streets empty, and all is silent once more. A tall, slender man walks hand in hand with his son in the demonstration. He has lived through the war, as they say, one of the last, perhaps, to remember. He has joined it against his will, the demonstration, and there's an ironical look in his eye, as if he finds the situation amusing. So his head somewhat to the side, as if he were listening to a distant sound, he lets himself be carried along through the city, back to the place where he began. With a quick gesture, he tosses back his straight, graying hair, dragging his feet a bit, as if each step raised clouds of ashes, although there were no ashes in sight. Amsterdam, January to July, 1982. That's the end of the assault. All right, guys. Thank you for listening. Thank you for everyone who contributed to making this audiobook. It was a pretty big project, so I'm happy that we got it done. Yeah. All right. Goodbye.